My name is Daniel Cross, and I was a forest ranger. I keep saying was because the word doesn't sit right anymore. Ranger implies boundaries, lines on maps, authority over land that stays where it's supposed to. What I deal with now doesn't respect any of that. I'm recording this because if I don't get out of my head, I'm afraid I'll start believing the forest version instead of my own. I worked at Pine Ridge Preserve, a protected stretch of forest wedged between two towns that were already dying before I arrived. The kind of places where storefronts stayed empty for years, and people only paid attention when someone disappeared. Pine Ridge didn't have dramatic cliffs or famous overlooks. It was just old trees, long trails, and silence that felt earned. That silence was why I took the job. Before Pine Ridge, I'd worked parks closer to cities. Too many people. Too many rules meant for liability instead of safety. Pine Ridge was different. Remote enough that most days I didn't see anyone at all. When I did, it was hikers who wanted to be alone as badly as I did. I lived on site in a ranger house about 3 miles from the nearest trailhead. 1 floor, old wood siding, a shallow porch that creaked when you stepped on it. Inside, it was simple. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen that always smelled faintly like pine sap no matter how much I cleaned. The center of the house was a desk bolted directly into the wall, wired into the preserve systems. That desk was my world. Above it were 8 CCTV monitors in 2 neat rows. Black and white feeds from cameras mounted along major trails, junctions, and restricted zones. Below them sat the radio console, emergency handset, and a stack of binders full of procedures and incident logs going back decades. Most of those binders were never touched. They existed so someone could say the rules had been written down somewhere. At night, the forest pressed close to the clearing around the house, but never crossed it. The tree line stayed back, like it understood the edge. I remember thinking that meant something, that the forest respected boundaries. The preserve itself was divided into sectors, each one clearly marked on maps and signs. North Loop was the most popular, wide trails and gentle slopes. Creekside followed a shallow stream and was always damp and cool. Old Burn was exactly what it sounded like, a scar of blackened trunks and new growth from a fire decades earlier. Ridgeline sat higher, quieter, with long stretches where sound carried too far. Each sector had numbered trails. Every half mile, a marker was nailed into a tree. Cameras watched the major points. Motion sensors covered restricted areas where the ground was unstable or still recovering. On paper, it was all very orderly. That order mattered more than I realized at the time. The previous ranger, Pete, walked me through everything on my first day. He was older, broad-shouldered, with a voice that sounded like it had been used too much and rested too little. He showed me the trails, the cameras, the sensor readouts. He answered my questions patiently, but there was a distance to him, like part of his attention was always elsewhere. We were standing on the porch of the ranger house when he gave me the rules. He didn't hand me a list. He didn't write anything down. He just leaned against the railing, staring into the trees beyond the clearing, and started talking. Never hike past dusk, even if you hear someone calling. If a trail marker is missing, changed, or damaged, turn back immediately and report it. Do not follow footprints that appear overnight. If you feel watched, don't react. And if the forest goes quiet all at once, stop moving and wait for sound to return. I laughed back then. A quick ha-ha-ha, more polite than amused. I thought it was tradition. Something old rangers did to mess with new hires. Every job had its folklore. Pete didn't laugh. He just nodded, like he was making sure I understood him correctly, then said, "You'll think some of these are stupid. Most people do. Just don't test them." 2 weeks later, he retired. He packed his truck, handed in his keys, and left without much ceremony. No farewell party. No long goodbye. Just a handshake and a look that lingered a second too long. I watched his truck disappear down the access road and felt like I'd been left holding something unfinished. For the first couple of months, nothing happened. I learned the rhythm of the place. morning patrols, afternoon paperwork, evening radio checks. I logged fallen branches, redirected lost hikers, repaired vandalized signs. I learned the sound of each sector. Creekside always had water underneath everything. Old Burn fell hollow, like the ground remembered being empty. Ridgeline carried sound too well, every footstep echoing back at you. The forest behaved the way forests are supposed to behave. That's what made the first incident so easy to ignore. It happened on camera C4, overlooking a bend in Creekside Trail. When I checked the feeds one morning, the image on that monitor didn't match my memory. Instead of the trail and stream, it showed trees. Too many trees. Trunks packed together, so tightly there was no space between them. No path, no water, just bark and shadow pressed close to the lens. I assumed the camera had been knocked loose. Wind, maybe. An animal climbing where it shouldn't have. I logged the issue, grabbed my gear, and headed out. When I reached the camera, everything was normal. The mount was secure. The angle was correct. Standing where it was bolted, I could see the trail bend perfectly. When I got back and checked the feed again, it showed exactly what it should. I marked it as a glitch and moved on. A week later, I found a trail marker with the wrong number. A 12 where a 14 should have been. I checked the map twice. The marker itself was old, weathered, like it had been there for years. I corrected it and told myself someone had miscounted during installation. Then another marker pointed the wrong way. Then I found one nailed upside down, sap still wet like it had been done recently. There are no footprints around it, no disturbed soil. It was like the forest had held its breath while it happened. That was when I started feeling watched. Not jumpy, not paranoid. It felt like pressure, like a tension resting on my back. When I turned, there was never anything there, but the feeling didn't leave. It followed me from trail to trail, patient and quiet. I told myself it was isolation, too much time alone. I laughed it off, a weak ha ha ha, and kept working. The day the forest went quiet for the first time, I was halfway through Ridgeline. Birds stopped mid-song. Insects vanished. Even the wind dropped out. The silence was so complete it felt physical, like cotton stuffed in my ears. My heart started pounding before my brain caught up. I remembered the rule and froze. I stood there, hands clenched, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. My legs trembled, but I didn't move. I whispered okay to myself without realizing it, my voice sounding too loud in my own head. For minutes passed before sound came back. It returned all at once. Birds, wind, leaves. Too loud, too sudden. I dropped to my knees, laughing a thin, broken ha 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 that tasted like panic. I told myself it was nothing. It happened again 2 days later, and again the week after that. By the end of the month, I was listening for silence the way prey listens for footsteps. That was when the cameras escalated. Feeds began looping. Timestamps skipped backward. Once I watched a deer cross the same screen 3 times in a row, each pass closer to the lens, its head tilted slightly, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. I started sleeping in short bursts at my desk, radio humming low, monitors glowing in the dark. I didn't know it yet, but the forest had already started learning my schedule, and I was about to learn how much that mattered. I didn't tell anyone about the cameras at first. That's the part that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. I was trained to document everything, to escalate anomalies, to never assume I was the smartest person in the room. But Pine Ridge had a way of making things feel personal, quiet, embarrassing even, like the forest would know if I talked about it. So I kept it to myself. I started tightening my routines instead. I logged camera checks every hour instead of every 4. I walked the same patrol routes in the same order, at the same times, like repetition might anchor things. I double-checked trail markers, even when I'd checked them the day before. I told myself structure mattered. That order mattered. The binders under my desk started filling faster. I began noticing patterns in the glitches. Camera C, for wasn't the only one anymore, but it was always the first. Whatever went wrong elsewhere seemed to echo there later. Creekside was learning faster than the other sectors. That should have bothered me more than it did. One night, while scrubbing through footage from Ridgeline, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The timestamp jumped forward 6 minutes, then corrected itself. In those missing minutes, the forest on screen looked closer. The trees leaned inward, just slightly, like a crowd listening. When the feed normalized, everything snapped back into place. I rewound it 3 times. The same thing happened every time. I checked the sensor logs. No movement recorded. No alerts triggered. That was the first time I smelled it indoors. Not pine. Not damp earth. Something sweet and sharp, like flowers left too long in water. It drifted through the ranger house, slowly, like it was taking its time. I stood there, breathing shallowly, afraid that acknowledging it might count as reacting. It faded after a few minutes. I slept in my boots that night. The feeling of being watched grew heavier after that. It wasn't constant. It came in waves. Strongest when I was near trail intersections or old signage. Places where decisions were made, where people chose which way to go. I started catching myself turning my head too quickly, like I was trying to catch something in the act. Every time, there was nothing there. Trees, shadows, normal forest geometry, normal enough to doubt myself. Then the radio started acting strange. At first, it was just static bursts during routine check-ins. I chalked it up to interference. The terrain was uneven. Signals bounced. It happened. But one evening, while logging sensor data, the radio crackled to life on its own. Cross. Daniel Cross. My name slid through the static, stretched and distorted, like it was being pulled through wet cloth. I stared at the handset, heart pounding, waiting for the call sign. Nothing followed. I keyed the mic, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. "This is Ranger Cross. Who's calling?" Only static answered. I logged it as interference and tried not to think about how the voice had sounded almost right. Almost like mine. That night, I dreamed of trees growing inside the house. Roots pushing through the floorboards. Branches pressing against the ceiling until it bowed inward. I woke up tangled in my sheets, gasping, the smell of sap heavy in the air. There were pine needles on the kitchen floor. I told myself I'd track them in. The next day, I found footprints. They appeared overnight along Creekside Trail, just past marker 14. Boot prints. My size. Same tread pattern. Same wear on the heel. They stepped off the trail and into the trees. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. Rule 3 echoed in my head. Do not follow footprints that appear overnight. So I didn't. I flagged the area, took photos, and turned back. My hands were shaking as I radioed in the report to a supervisor who sounded half asleep and very far away. He told me to mark it for maintenance and move on. I didn't sleep at all that night. The camera showed movement I couldn't explain. Shadows passing just outside the frame. Trees swaying when there was no wind. On one monitor, for just a second, I saw a figure standing perfectly still between 2 trunks. The image glitched before I could focus on it. I rewound the footage. Nothing. I started talking to myself more after that. Just small things. Narrating my actions. Grounding techniques I'd learned years ago. If I kept hearing my own voice, maybe I wouldn't hear anything else. That worked for a while. Then came the night the cameras show my house. It was past midnight. I was half asleep at the desk, chin resting on my chest, when the radio popped loudly enough to make me jump. I lifted my head, just as one of the monitors flickered. The image resolved into a familiar shape. My ranger house. The back side of it. The narrow kitchen window. The porch steps. The tree line beyond the clearing. The angle was wrong. Too low. Like whoever was looking stood just inside the forest. I felt cold spread through my chest as I checked the camera label. C7. Old Burn Sector. 3 miles away. I stood up slowly and walked to the window behind me. Pulled the curtain aside with 2 fingers. Outside was darkness. The clearing. Trees standing where they always had. I turned back to the monitor. The feed flickered. For half a second, I saw a movement near the porch. A shape adjusting itself, like it was deciding how to stand. Then the screen snapped back to a normal old burn feed. I shut the system down after that. Not just the monitor. Everything. Cameras. Sensors. Radio. I unplugged the main console like a kid afraid of something crawling out of it. The sudden silence inside the house felt wrong, but safer than watching. I sat on the floor with my back against the desk until morning. That was when the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate, circling the clearing, leaves crunching softly, stopping whenever I moved or held my breath. I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep myself quiet, tears slipping down my face without me realizing it. I don't know how long it lasted. When daylight came, the forest looked normal again. Too normal. I went back to work because I didn't know what else to do. I avoided Creekside. I avoided Old Burn. I stuck to North Loop, where hikers still came, where human noise seemed to keep things at bay. That's where I met the missing hiker. He signed a trail log that morning. Young, college age, polite. He asked if the creek crossings were safe this time of year. I told him they were. I watched him head down North Loop with a small wave. That was the last time anyone saw him. His car was still there that evening. Search and rescue arrived the next morning. Dogs, volunteers, radios buzzing with voices that felt grounding, human. We walked the trails together. We called his name until our throats hurt. The forest didn't answer. On the second day, one of the volunteers asked me if Creekside had always been that narrow. I told him it had. But when I looked, I wasn't sure anymore. The third night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed at the station. The silence pressed in, thick and expectant. I try not to think about the footprints, or the cameras, or the way the forest seemed to lean closer when no one was around to notice. That's when I heard crying. It came from off-trail, deep in the trees. A man sobbing, choking on his breath, calling for help. I froze. Rule 1 burned in my head. Never hike past dusk, even if you hear someone calling. The voice cracked again, desperate and familiar in a way that made my chest ache. Then he said my name, softly, perfectly, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the forest wasn't just watching anymore. It was asking, and I was standing right at the edge of the answer. That I stood there for a long time after he said my name. The sensible part of me screamed to stay put, to lock the door, to call for backup and let daylight handle it. I kept thinking about Pete on the porch, the way he'd stared into the trees like he was listening to something only he could hear. We ignored that rule more than any other. Night calls happened. Drunk hikers. Animals that sounded human when they panicked. Wind funneling through ravines the wrong way. 99 times out of 100, following a voice after dusk led to nothing but embarrassment and paperwork. Sometimes it didn't. The crying started again, louder this time. Wet. Broken. It sounded close enough that I could imagine the shape of his face, head bowed, hands over his eyes. Please, the voice said. I can't find a trail. I grabbed my flashlight. I remember telling myself I'd only go as far as the tree lean. Just enough to confirm it was nothing. Just enough to clear my conscience. I left the door open behind me, the light from the ranger house spilling onto the clearing like a lifeline. The moment I stepped off the porch, the smell hit me. Sweet. Rotting. Like crushed flowers left in stagnant water. The beam of my flashlight cut through the trees as I moved toward the sound. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the ground was subtly resisting me. Leaves crunched under my boots, but the sound felt muffled, wrong, like it was being swallowed before it could travel. The crying drifted deeper. I crossed the edge of the clearing and felt it immediately. The forest closed in. Trees that should have been spaced apart stood too close together. Branches overlapped in ways I didn't remember. The air felt thick, like breathing through damp fabric. My radio crackled at my hip, voices overlapping in fragments that never formed words. I stopped and turned around. The ranger house was gone. Not hidden, not obscured. Gone. In its place was more forest, stretching back the way I'd come, trunks packed tight. No clearing, no porch light, no sign I'd ever lived there. My chest tightened. panic rising so fast it made me dizzy. I forced myself to breathe. The rules surfaced again. If the forest goes quiet all at once, stop moving and wait. It wasn't quiet yet. Not completely. The crying continued ahead of me, pulling, guiding. I took another step forward, then another, each one a mistake I could feel even as I made it. The ground began to slope downward gently, like the forest was funneling me somewhere. I didn't recognize the terrain. There were no markers, no familiar trees. The beam of my flashlight seemed weaker here, swallowed by shadow. Then the crying stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no insects, no distant water, nothing. My ears rang. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. I froze mid-step, one foot lifted, afraid that even setting it down would break something fragile and unseen. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time felt thick and stretched. When something moved ahead of me, it wasn't sudden. It was careful. At first, I thought it was just a shadow shifting. Then it straightened. A shape separated itself from the trees, stepping forward into the edge of my flashlight beam. It didn't rush. It didn't stalk. It stood there, adjusting its posture like someone learning how to use a body for the first time. My body recognized danger before my mind did. My legs locked. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was tall, roughly my height. Its outline was wrong in small ways that made my skin crawl. The shoulders sat a little too high. The arms hung a fraction too long. When it took a step forward, its joints bent out of sequence like it was following instructions slightly out of order. Then it lifted its head. My face looked back at me. Not perfectly. Not yet. The features were mine, but softened, blurred, like a memory recalled by someone else. The eyes were right, but empty. The nose was my nose, but positioned just slightly too high. When it smiled, the smile came first, stretching wide, and the rest of the expression followed a heartbeat later. It blinked after I did. Every time, a soft sound came from its throat. Not quite a word, not quite a sob. It tilted its head, studying me, and I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. This was what the forest had been doing, learning. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a root. The thing took a step forward in response, mirroring my movement with unsettling precision. I smelled the rot stronger now, clinging to the air around it. "No," I whispered. It echoed me. "No," it said, my voice dragged thin and wrong. Something inside me snapped. I turned and ran. Branches tore my arms and face as I crashed through the trees. I didn't follow any trail. I didn't look back. My lungs burned, my vision tunneling as panic took over completely. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not chasing, keeping pace, matching my rhythm. I burst through a wall of brush and stumbled onto gravel, my knees slamming into the ground hard enough to knock the breath from me. I collapsed there, gagging, scraping my palms raw as I tried to crawl forward. Light flooded my vision. A trail marker loomed in front of me. North Loop, marker 9. I sobbed, a broken sound that ripped out of me before I could stop it. I turned onto my back and stared up at the canopy, waiting for something to step out after me. Nothing did. The forest around the trail was normal, open, spaced correctly. Night sounds had returned, hesitant at first, then steady. Crickets, wind, leaves. Search and rescue found me there an hour later, curled up on the trail like a child. They asked me what happened. I told them I got turned around, that I panicked, that the dark played tricks on me. They believed me because it was easier than anything else. They never found the hiker. Not a body, not clothing, not a scrap of gear. The official report listed him as presumed deceased. Exposure, disorientation, tragic but common. I knew better. After that night, the forest stopped pretending with me. Trail markers shifted while I watched. Numbers bled into others, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Cameras showed narrow corridors of trees that didn't exist, sloping downward into darkness that swallowed the image entirely. Sometimes, in the reflection of a monitor, I saw someone standing behind me. I stopped checking the footage alone. I stopped sleeping altogether. I started finding rules written in my own handwriting that I didn't remember writing. Scribbled notes tucked into binders. Phrases scrawled in the margins of maps. Do not stay still too long. If it uses your voice, do not answer. If you see yourself first, run. I don't know when I decided to quit. Maybe I'd already quit the moment I ran out of that forest. The paperwork came later. A resignation email sent at 3 in the morning. A packed truck by sunrise. I didn't look back when I left Pine Ridge. I was too afraid I'd see someone else standing in my place, watching me go. I thought leaving would end it. I thought distance would matter. I was wrong. The first night in my new apartment, miles from the nearest forest, I woke up to the smell of sap. There were pine needles on my bedroom floor. And somewhere, very far away but getting closer, I heard the sound of careful footsteps learning a new layout that I didn't go back to Pine Ridge after that night. I told myself it was over the moment my tires hit the highway. The forest shrank in my rearview mirror until it was just another dark line against the sky. I kept driving until my hands stopped shaking, until the smell of sap faded from my clothes, until the radio stopped crackling between stations like it was searching for something. I rented a small apartment in a city 2 hours away. Concrete, traffic, sirens. Too much noise, but I welcomed it. Noise meant witnesses. Noise meant rules that made sense. For the first week, nothing happened. I slept with the lights on. I kept my phone charging beside my pillow. I jumped at every sound, but it was just neighbors, pipes, cars passing below my window. I started to believe distance really did matter. Then I woke up one morning with dirt under my fingernails. I stared at my hands for a long time, turning them under the light, trying to remember gardening, a fall, anything that made sense. I washed them raw in the sink and went to work pretending my stomach wasn't twisted into knots. That night, I found pine needles in my shoes. I hadn't been near a park. I told myself it was stress, muscle memory, trauma, clinging in stupid, physical ways. People talk about bringing work home with them like it's a joke. I laughed at myself, a thin, forced ha-ha-ha that didn't make me feel better at all. The radio started a few nights later. At first, I thought it was my phone buzzing. A notification, a wrong sound in the dark. But then I heard static. Low, familiar, the exact texture of the old Ranger console. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, scanning the room. The sound was coming from my kitchen. I moved slowly, barefoot on cold tile, every nerve screaming at me to stop. The small emergency radio I'd packed without thinking was sitting on the counter. Turned on. The dial crackled, then cleared just enough for a voice to come through. Cross. Ranger Cross. My own voice. Not recorded. Not quite right. It paused in the wrong places, like it was reading from script it didn't fully understand. I shut the radio off and threw in the trash outside my building. I watched the lid slam shut and stayed there for a full minute, breathing hard, waiting for something to argue with me. Nothing did. For a while after that, it stayed quiet again. But the city started changing in small ways. I noticed trees where I didn't remember them being. One between two buildings on my walk to work. Another at the edge of a parking lot, pressed up against a brick wall where roots shouldn't have fit. They were never there 2 days in a row. They appeared, then vanished, like placeholders. At night, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, careful. They always stopped outside my door. I never heard it leave. I stopped looking through the peephole after the second time I saw someone standing there with their back to the door, head tilted, like they were listening to my breathing. I started finding notes. Not messages. Rules. Written on scrap paper. On receipts. Once, carved lightly into the wood of my kitchen table like someone had traced the letters with a fingernail. Do not sleep with the lights off. If you hear yourself outside, stay inside. If it knocks 3 times, do not answer. I don't remember writing any of them. The handwriting was mine. That's when I understood what I'd done wrong. The forest hadn't followed me. It had finished learning me. I broke rule 1 the moment I stepped off that porch. Everything after that wasn't pursuit. It was process. Adaptation. Pine Ridge didn't need to drag me back. It brought itself with me instead. Piece by piece, rule by rule. Last night, the footsteps came inside the apartment. Slow. Familiar. They moved the way I move when I don't want to wake anyone. I sat on my bed, shaking, whispering no under my breath, staring at the bedroom door. The handle turned just enough to click. On my wall, something new was written. A rule I had never seen before. If you hear breathing that matches yours, hold your breath. I don't know how long I can do that. I can hear it now, standing just outside this room, adjusting its posture, getting better at the angles of this place, learning where everything is, learning where I am. And I know, with a certainty that makes my chest ache, that when the rules stop changing, it means the forest is finished.